Hey everyone, this is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. Happy Friday, everybody. Today we are going to take a look at the archetypal combination of Jupiter and Uranus. Jupiter and Uranus are co-present right now in the sign of Taurus. They'll be conjoining next spring in 2024, April, and they spend almost an entire year together in the same sign. In order to explore this archetypal combination, I want to share with you a recent talk that was done as a part of our summer speaker series from my friend and colleague, Becca Tarnas. She was a part of our summer speaker series at the Nightlight Astrology School here in July. And with her permission, she's given me the permission to publish her talk, which was it was open to the public, but we don't usually publish these talks on YouTube. She has given me permission to share it with all of you. And so I want to, we're going to replay that talk in case you missed it, which happened in early July. I'm doing this because I think you'll love the talk. I think it is really a poignant talk, and it's relevant because we have a big combination at hand with Jupiter and Uranus course over the course of the next year. So on that level, I think you'll love it. I also want to expose you to the speaker series. If you don't know about it, I want you to know more about it. And I'm going to show you the website where you can learn more about it and all of that. Also, I want to expose you to Becca's work. If you don't know Becca Tarnas, she is a fantastic astrologer, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about her, but you'll see for yourself in the video as we watch it. So that's the goal for today. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe. Share your comments and reflections as we go. Share your love for Becca and go check out her work. I'll tell you how to do so in a minute. You can find a transcript of today's talk on the website, nightlightastrology.com. And then if you go over to the website and you take a look at any of our readings and courses, if you have any questions about what you find on the courses page or the readings page, feel free to email us info@nightlightastrology.com. Okay, so a little bit more about Becca. She is a fantastic astrologer that I have had the pleasure to work with many times before in my online programs. This is her right here. And if you go to her website, you can learn more about her and everything she's up to. She has a great blog and many talks that she is frequently doing, podcasts and so forth. So you can learn more about her and her publications. She is a professor. She teaches out west. I'm trying to remember if it's at Pacifica or if it is at California Institute of Integral Studies, or maybe both at this point. But at any rate, she's done she's a fantastic astrologer. Of course, she has a pedigree. Her father's Richard Tarnas, if you guys know him, Cosmos and Psyche. And so she comes from an astrological bloodline, you could say, and she's a fantastic astrologer in her own right. She wrote a book called Journey to the Imaginal Realm, A Reader's Guide to J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, which is fantastic. She's come and given talks for our students on the subject of Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings, and astrology before. You can find her on Instagram, Becca.Tarnas, and I highly recommend that you check out her work, follow her. She's someone that you definitely want to add to your list of people to receive astrological insight from. Honestly, one of my favorites in terms of who I like to listen to. When Becca speaks, my ears are dialed in because she is really smart and very sensitive when it comes to reading the archetypal combinations of the planets. Now, if you go over to our website, which is nightlightastrology.com, I want to tell you how you can participate in these series in the future. If you go to our events page and you click on speaker series on the Nightlight Astrology website, you'll see our summer speaker series. Here's for July of 2023. We will also be replaying Emma Frey's talk. She's given us permission to use her talk as well. So we will be publishing that on the YouTube channel coming up. And you can see that the talks are here. You can sign up for any of our talks. Per season, we have 3 speakers that come out every season between equinoxes and solstices. And so you can sign up for free, get the link to participate live. We have a replay link that's posted for about a week, and then it's taken down. I think Becca's is probably down by the time you're listening to this at any rate. Yeah, it is. But Emma's will be coming up as well. She has a great talk she's doing. You can see her talking about astrological physiognomy, which is a fascinating study of how our faces actually look like certain aspects of our charts. Really fascinating. And then Michael A. Bryan will be here giving a talk on event-based natal chart prediction. Great astrologers, and we always have great astrologers in these series. So, and it's free to attend. So you should check it out and participate in the next series. And in case you missed it or want to know more about the series, I thought while I'm on vacation, a great way to create some content would be to show you some of the recent talks from our speaker series. So without further ado, I hope you will really enjoy this presentation on the topic of Jupiter and Uranus. Remember, they are co-present in the sign of Taurus for the next year with a big conjunction in April of 2024. So I think you'll really appreciate Becca's wisdom on this subject. And again, if you want to check out Becca's work, go to beccatarnas.com or check becca.tarnas on Instagram. All right, that's it. I hope you will enjoy this talk as much as I did. Take care, everyone. Bye.
So we're going to be discussing Jupiter-Uranus for this presentation. And this is going to be a combination of looking at different historical examples of Jupiter-Uranus alignments, correlations with the Jupiter-Uranus axial alignments, mostly the conjunction, the opposition. And in addition to the historical examples, which draw from science and technology and the arts, film, literature, music, I'm also going to be bringing in a number of examples in the latter part of the presentation, just so that you can really get a feeling for the quality of Jupiter-Uranus. I like illustrating the archetypal complexes with different examples where you're not just taking in the information intellectually, you actually get to experience the quality. And so I'll be pulling in some music, some film, animated film, a kind of political, cultural moment, and a few other examples there. So that's a way of kind of bringing to life what we're talking about. And the reason that I'm speaking about Jupiter-Uranus, which is what Adam requested that I bring to the series this summer, is because we are entering in right now to a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction period. Now, the orbs that I use for world transits, the orb of influence, basically when a transit is effective, for a conjunction or an opposition, I work with a 15-degree orb. Now, this might be wider than some of you are used to looking at, but I've really found that using those wider orbs of 15 degrees for a conjunction and an opposition, 10 degrees for the square and the trine, a little smaller for the sextile, really gives you the fuller picture of what is going on in terms of the wave, the arc of a world transit. We can look at when the transit is in very tight alignment, within 3 degrees, 1 degree exact. That's usually when it's most potent, when it's kind of boiling over into the collective. But it's really worth looking at these larger waveforms, these patterns. And I take that using those orbs directly from my mentor, my teacher, who also happens to be my father, Rick Tarnas, who applied those wider orbs in his research over the last, I think it's about 50 years now, into looking at correlations with world history and culture. And he found that those larger orbs capture the fuller picture. So, to understand the 1960s, for example, we need that 15-degree orb to see Uranus and Pluto were in conjunction from 1960 to 1972. And that makes sense when we think about the full arc of the revolutionary kind of cultural upheaval of the 1960s. It's not just centered on when they were in exact alignment in 66 and 67. And that can be applied to any of the world transit cycles, whether inner planets or outer planets. But it's really with the outer planets that we see that come through in terms of these larger cultural expressions that infuse the zeitgeist with their archetypal qualities. So with Jupiter-Uranus, if you use a 15-degree orb, that conjunction actually just began in June. It actually reached that 15-degree point on June 8th of this year, depending on your time zone. And it's going to be with us for the next 14 months. So Jupiter-Uranus alignments, the conjunction, that kind of new moon position of the two planets. Conjunctions of Jupiter and Uranus occur every 14 years, and they last for 14 months. So that's kind of an easy parallel to remember, approximately 14 months. Sometimes as they move in and out of that larger orb, occasionally they'll last 23 months, but for the most part, it's 14 months. And that is the case for this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction that we're entering into now. And so this whole first almost year of the conjunction, Jupiter and Uranus are going to be dancing near each other, but they're not actually going to reach their exact alignment until next April, so April of 2024. And then they'll stay within that 15-degree orb until through most of July of that year. And so with Jupiter-Uranus, what we can expect to see, let's first enter into that archetypal complex, the combination of Jupiter with Uranus. So Jupiter as an archetypal principle, which the archetypal meaning of Jupiter has been established as far back as our historical memory can go. We can recognize the understanding of the meaning of Jupiter in the Greek god Zeus, for example, or the Roman Jupiter, or the Babylonian Marduk. It's this kingly deity that is the pinnacle, the height, the one who has the broadest perspective, one who is magnanimous and joyful, who brings blessings and gifts and abundance. And so that's what we see with the planetary archetype of Jupiter. Jupiter relates to blessings and joy and riches and wealth. It's the great heights, the great heights of culture, of civilization, big, grand ideas, philosophy, kind of the high cultural tradition, anything that has that quality of grandeur, of excess, of magnification. So anything that Jupiter relates to, it becomes bigger. It's given largesse. There's a buoyancy to Jupiter. I notice whenever I talk about the archetype of Jupiter, I can't help but make big gestures, kind of grand gestures that take up space. That's the quality of Jupiter. And it has this kind of abundant, joyful, optimistic outlook. It crowns king or queen. It makes royal, whatever it touches, whatever it comes into relationship to. It is the king maker, as it were. And of course, it's fitting that it's the largest planetary body in our solar system. Jupiter's so large, it almost became a second sun in our solar system. And now when we bring that expansive, buoyant, joyful quality into relationship with Uranus. Now, Uranus is the archetypal trickster, the awakener, the liberator, the rebel and the revolutionary. And we can see it reflected mythically in the Greek Prometheus, the god who steals fire from the heavens and grants it as new consciousness, new awareness, new technology to humanity. We can also see it in the Nordic Loki, that kind of trickster figure that's ambiguous. With Uranus, there is that ambiguous quality of it's not always oriented toward the good. It's oriented toward change and what's new and what's exciting and different. But it can have a shadow side. It can have a trickster element that's disruptive, that's problematic, the rebel without a cause. We can see the qualities of the planetary archetype of Uranus in Native American stories of coyote or raven or rabbit, these different trickster figures, again, some of whom steal fire, like the Greek Prometheus. We can see it in the Yoruba Orisha Oya, this lightning change maker who brings awakening, who brings disruption. Whatever she relates to, whatever she touches, changes, and is lightning quick. It has that electrical crackle of the Uranian principle. And so when you bring these two together, Jupiter grants its buoyancy, its success, its celebratory quality to that Uranian impulse for change, for liberation, for awakening, for breakthrough, for freedom. Uranus is youthful, and so there's a young quality that we can see in Jupiter-Uranus alignments. And so I want to bring in two different stories that illustrate the Jupiter-Uranus complex. On the one hand, you can think of the story of Peter Pan, the eternal youth, the eternal child, who doesn't want to grow up. And not only does he not want to grow up, he stays that youthful being in that childhood state, that childlike state of consciousness, living in a fantastical world of Neverland. But what is he most known for? He flies. And this is something that we definitely see correlated with Jupiter-Uranus alignments, the history of flight, the history of space exploration, that impulse to break free of the bounds of gravity and soar to new heights, new experiences. And then we can see now in the story of Peter Pan, it's a delightful tale that as children we identify with, as adults we may long for. And we know individuals in our lives who, even as they get older, they hold that puer eternus, or that puella eterna, the eternal child, the eternal youth quality in their being. They never quite want to grow up. And there can be a shadow side to that desire to not take on the Saturnian responsibilities and burdens, not to mature, not to enter into our wisdom phase to become elders. And so there's a kind of natural complementarity between the puer of Jupiter-Uranus and the senex of Saturn. And if you want to dive into that more, there's a wonderful pair of essays by the great archetypal psychologist James Hillman called Puer and Senex that looks into that. So as a kind of cautionary tale of the Jupiter-Uranus archetypal complex, we can look to the Greek myth of Icarus. And for those who may not be familiar with this myth, there was a great genius, and this is something you'll hear particularly with Uranus, that Uranian quality of the genius, the brilliant mind who can kind of leap in quantum leaps to new insights and awakenings. There is this genius inventor, mathematician, scientist named Daedalus in the Greek myths, who is entrapped on the island of Crete by the king Minos. And he lives there for many years, creating extraordinary inventions for the king and the queen, including the labyrinth that holds the Minotaur, which is another Greek myth that you may be familiar with, the story of Theseus and the Minotaur, and the princess Ariadne, whose thread helps Theseus overcome the Minotaur and then come out of Daedalus's brilliant labyrinth that held the Minotaur safely captive for many years. Now, Daedalus is trapped here. He wants to escape, and he has a young son, Icarus. And so in secret, he crafts two sets of wings. Again, there you see that theme of flight. He crafts two sets of wings for them to wear. And he uses wax to hold the feathers, which he collects over many years together on a carefully laid wooden frame. And when he's done, he gives one pair to his son Icarus, and he puts on another pair himself. And he instructs Icarus on how to fly, on how to take flight, how to use the wings to glide along the currents of air, this extraordinarily ingenious craft of flight that he's made. And You can see all the way back in ancient Greece that impulse, the human desire to take flight, to fly like birds in the sky, something that we cannot do with our own biology, but we can do now with our creative genius. Again, as we'll see, correlated with the history of Jupiter-Uranus alignments. And so in secret, Daedalus and Icarus leave Crete. They fly off of a cliff and they are soaring over the sea. And the young Icarus, again, the eternal youth, the puer eternus, takes delight in the buoyancy of flight. And he flies closer and closer to the sun. And he doesn't heed his father's warnings, saying, do not fly too close to the sun. You have to stay at the lower levels. The sun is too hot. It's a risk. It'll melt the wax. But Icarus is taking such joy in the flight that he cannot just follow his father's prudent instructions. And so in joy, he flies toward the heights, up into the sun. And the heat of the sun, of Helios, begins to melt the wax. And as the wax melts, the feathers begin to fall. The weight of gravity, Saturn, begins to pull him down until the wings fall apart. And even though his father tries to save him, the young Icarus comes crashing down into the sea and is drowned. And so it's this tragic cautionary tale of that shadow side of Jupiter-Uranus, where we may aim for the heights. We may desire to stay as a youth, as the immature child getting to play and invent and create, but not take on the Saturnian responsibilities, not heed the warnings of those who know that we need to follow the rules or the regulations, that there need to be limits and boundaries. And so this myth illustrates those qualities. So I wanted to give those as a couple examples so you could really feel into the qualities of the Jupiter-Uranus archetypal complex before we get into some of the historical examples of Jupiter-Uranus. And much of these examples that I'm going to bring forward in this presentation are drawn from Rick Tarnas's Cosmos and Psyche. That he has a very rich and thorough chapter or section on the Jupiter-Uranus alignments through history. And so I'm bringing that forward just to give you a taste of what's in that chapter. And so some of you may have, or in that section, that set of chapters. So some of you may already have read that, and this will be a kind of bringing forward a reminder and illustration of that section of Cosmos and Psyche. And for others, this may be new material. And for those of you where it is new material, I really want to encourage you to read that chapter. Think of it as kind of, as this is a class, think of that chapter as a kind of supplemental follow-up reading to this presentation, so that you can really go deeply into the details of how Jupiter-Uranus has come through in a whole variety of fields in the last several centuries. Now, Jupiter-Uranus axial alignments. Now, the axial alignment, again, it's the conjunction and the opposition, that axis of the chart. These axial alignments correlate with so many major milestones and kind of celebratory breakthroughs in essentially every field that we can turn our attention to. And so if you are an expert in a particular field, whatever that might be, I strongly encourage you to look at what were the milestones, what were the breakthroughs in that field you are an expert in, and look at the history, look at Jupiter-Uranus conjunctions and oppositions, and see what lines up in your particular field. So whether we look to physics or chemistry or biology, we can see these milestones, these breakthrough moments, especially when new theories, especially theories that have been worked on for quite some time, when they become public or when they're published or when the spark of insight happened. That's what usually lines up with the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction or opposition. It's as though these 14-month windows awaken something in the individual and in the collective that open out these milestone moments. And so we see these clusters of such breakthroughs, such awakenings during Jupiter-Uranus alignments. We also see this in the history of music. We see this in the history of literature or in film. We also see Jupiter-Uranus alignments igniting revolutions or rebellions that are often, they're brief. Typically, they're successful in the moment, but they're often part of a larger unfolding. And so this is where it's important to understand Jupiter-Uranus in connection with longer, larger outer planetary cycles. So for example, Uranus-Pluto alignments or Uranus-Neptune alignments. It's when Jupiter joins those alignments, whether in opposition or conjunction, and sometimes by the square, that it's like Jupiter-Uranus brings that Uranus-Pluto revolutionary period to a height, or the Uranus-Neptune kind of creative, spiritually and cosmologically emancipatory period, again, to a kind of height or breakthrough. And I'll give examples of that going forward. So, for example, if we look to the period that comprises the scientific revolution, a whole succession of discoveries and publications in what we consider the period of the scientific revolution, they had their breakthrough moments during Jupiter-Uranus axial alignments. And so, for example, there were two moments that contributed to the Copernican revolution in a very significant way that happened virtually simultaneously. This was when Kepler introduced his two laws of planetary motion in 1609. So the two laws of planetary motion are the planets, recognizing that the planets don't move in circular orbits, as we see in the Ptolemaic model, but rather they move in elliptical orbits around the sun, and that he recognized they sweep out equal areas in equal times as the planets move through their elliptical orbits. And so he published on these two laws of planetary motion in 1609 under the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction of 1609 to 1610. Virtually at the same time, Galileo turned his telescope to the heavens in 1609 and 1610 for the first time. The telescope was a fairly new creation that was starting to be used across Europe, particularly in navigation. But instead of looking out toward the horizon, Galileo turned the telescope to the sky. And what he saw essentially confirmed the heliocentric theory brought forward by Copernicus half a century earlier. And what he saw through the telescope, he looked at the Milky Way, and instead of it being this band of light across the sky, he saw the individual stars of the Milky Way, which vastly expanded the universe. The conception or the size of the cosmos, seeing the individual stars of the Milky Way. So again, you can hear that Jupiterian quality of expanse and the Uranian revelation or breakthrough. He saw the craters of the moon and recognized that the moon also had a topography like the Earth. He saw the spots on the sun. He saw the moons of Jupiter. We've found many more moons. I think it's 79 moons of Jupiter now, but he saw the four most visible, which are now called the Galilean moons, after him viewing those. The moons of Jupiter orbiting the planet Jupiter. How interesting that it's Jupiter in this case that he's looking at. And so if Jupiter can have moons orbiting it, and the Earth can have a moon orbiting it, then that corroborates the heliocentric theory that the planets can move around the sun, and the planets can also have smaller bodies moving around them. He also witnessed the phases of Venus, which further affirmed the movement of the planets around the sun rather than the movement of the planets around the Earth, as was believed for so many centuries. And depicted really beautifully in the Ptolemaic model. So these two scientific affirmations of the Copernican theory came forward in this brief period, 1609 to 1610, under the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. Now, interesting, if we go more than half a century prior, it was under the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction of 1540 to 41 that Copernicus was finally persuaded by his student Rheticus to publish his heliocentric theory in De Revolutionibus after many years of hesitation. Bringing forward this theory was extremely controversial, and he ended up publishing it on his deathbed in 1543, so just after the conjunction. But it was during the conjunction that he was persuaded it's time to bring this new theory forward, which initiated the Copernican revolution and therefore gave birth to the scientific revolution overall. Now, another major figure of the scientific revolution, Descartes, he published his Discourse on Method in 1637 under the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction of that year. And in the Discourse on Method, he proposes a new method of thought that goes on to shape the scientific method going forward, basically bringing together the objective truth of mathematics — Descartes was a mathematician — and the intuitive truth of the senses. And he begins by doubting everything. And you've probably heard this famous statement that he comes to. He's doubting everything, even his senses, everything that he perceives in the world. But he comes to the conclusion, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. And it's this extraordinary breakthrough moment in the history of philosophy, the history of thought, the history of science, that recognition of the individual self. And when we doubt, what is left but that capacity for thought? And so his Discourse on Method can be understood in kind of four parts. First of all, to doubt everything, and then to break problems into simpler parts, which of course is what we now see in scientific reductionism, which has a very problematic side. We're now leaning much more toward a science of holism, a science of systems and complexity. But a reductionist method is extremely effective in breaking a problem into parts and understanding those individual parts. The key thing is putting it back together again, which is the task of a later scientific revolution or transformation. So in that reductionism, one solves the simple problems first, kind of moving from the simplest to the more complex, and then the importance of being thorough in the investigation. And Descartes' discourse on method is a huge kind of threshold moment in the unfolding of the scientific revolution. And so fittingly, Descartes was born not only with a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, but it's actually part of this amazing stellium with the Sun and Pluto not too far away, or Mercury and Venus. And it's when one looks at a chart like that, where almost all of the planets are in a massive stellium, that even though much of the Cartesian legacy has been at this point quite negative, reductionism, the splitting, the duality of mind from matter, let alone his attitude toward animals. It nonetheless, you can't help but look at a chart like that and think the cosmos must have chosen an individual like this to have this kind of breakthrough moment, this extraordinary impact on culture and on the development of a new worldview, for them to be born with a chart like that. Now, if we go forward in the history of science, there's another extraordinary kind of parallel, much like the parallel between Galileo turning the telescope toward the heavens and Kepler publishing his laws of planetary motion. And this is the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction of 1899 to 1900, so the turn of the 20th century. And this correlates with the birth, kind of the simultaneous birth of two major fields that define the 20th century. This is the birth of quantum physics and the birth of psychoanalysis, so brought forward by Max Planck on the one hand and Sigmund Freud on the other. Freud published his book, The Interpretation of Dreams, which began the psychoanalytic movement in November of 1899, but he dated it 1900. He wanted it, even though it was published in November of 1899, he wanted it to be dated 1900 to catch the beginning of the new century, that to be a marker of the beginning of the 20th century. And we can certainly say that the 20th century what can be understood as the depth psychology century in a lot of ways, that turn toward the depths of the unconscious and a recovery, which had been intimated in philosophy since Descartes in some ways. The recognition of the depths of the unconscious, of the objective psyche, of the inner world, the valuing of that inner world. So essentially simultaneously with the birth of psychoanalysis with Freud, Max Planck introduces his hypothesis that radiant energy is emitted or absorbed in discrete quanta, so igniting the revolution in quantum physics. And the quantum revolution was, in a sense, brought to an extraordinary culmination two Jupiter-Uranus conjunctions later in 1927. So kind of quantum leap from the beginning of the quantum revolution with Max Planck introducing this idea to this extraordinary convergence of physicists in the year 1927. During this year, scholars have said that the pace of discovery in theoretical physics was greater than perhaps any other year in the history of science. And this was when a whole group of physicists came together. This kind of culminated in the Solvay Congress in Brussels in 1927, bringing together Niels Bohr, who was the leader of the Congress, Werner Heisenberg, Schrödinger, Born, de Broglie, Pauli, Dirac, Planck again, all working together and formulating kind of the basic tenets of quantum physics. And two of the theories that were hashed out during this 14-month conjunction leading up to the Solvay Congress were Heisenberg's principle of indeterminacy and Bohr's principle of complementarity. And both of those were made public under the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction of 1927. And then also in the same year, Georges Lemaitre proposes the theory of an expanding universe, which again it's a radically new cosmology, which eventually leads to an understanding of the Big Bang hypothesis, or as I prefer to call it after one of my own teachers, Brian Swim, who's a mathematical cosmologist, also born with Jupiter-Uranus. He calls it the great flaring forth, which I think is a very apt way to describe this theorized concept of the birth of the universe. But before this, there wasn't even an understanding that there were multiple galaxies in the cosmos. There was the thought that the Milky Way was the entire cosmos, and then it's with Hubble's telescopic discoveries that we actually get the evidence that there are multiple galaxies, and then we can perceive the background radiation that leads to the recognition that the universe itself is expanding in all directions. And so again, you can see those Jupiter-Uranus qualities. It's the Uranian kind of brilliant, ingenious scientific breakthrough and awakening to, what is it? A Jupiterian expanding larger cosmos. We can also see, if you look to the Jupiter-Uranus opposition just prior to that 1927 conjunction, from which took place late 1919 through 21, this was when Einstein's general theory of relativity was essentially proven. So in November of 1919, um, the report was made public on the eclipse calculations that confirmed Einstein's general theory of relativity. And so these calculations predicted that it predicted the bending of light in a gravitational field. And so Einstein proposed that stars near the sun would be displaced from their normal positions. And we can observe this during a solar eclipse. Why? Because from our perspective on Earth, the light of the sun is blocked, so we can actually see the position of the stars. And sure enough, the stars were displaced by the light of the sun from their normal position. So it demonstrates the curvature of space-time. And so with that confirmation, Einstein was declared the greatest genius who has ever lived. You could hear that kind of Jupiterian celebration of the genius, the Uranian genius. And as Rick Tarnas describes it, he says, Prometheus is crowned king. You see that with this kind of celebration, this crowning of Einstein at that time. And so, of course, it's very fitting that Einstein is born with a Jupiter-Uranus opposition. And he's so often brought forward as our quintessential picture of the genius. And these pivotal moments often occur not only when the Jupiter-Uranus alignment is happening in the sky, but it's activating the chart of the individual in a very significant way. And so 4 of the greatest figures of the scientific worldview, Galileo, Descartes, Newton, and Einstein, they all made their major discoveries under Jupiter-Uranus alignments in opposition to their natal Uranus. So that pivotal midlife transit of the Uranus opposition is brought to a new height when Jupiter joins the alignment. So as we're going into this current Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, for those of you who are in your early 40s, you are entering into or are in your Uranus opposition. And so that's worth looking at in terms of where are you putting your focus and your energy and your creative endeavors, because this could be an extraordinarily creative window for you in your life that could lead to breakthroughs in whatever area of life you are working in. Just to give another example, during the conjunction of 1858, so now we're going back to the middle of the 19th century, Darwin and Wallace, they read a joint paper on their independently conceived theories of evolution. So Darwin had formulated his theory 20 years earlier in 1838, but it was 20 years later, 1858, Darwin receives a letter from Wallace, where Wallace is articulating essentially the same theory of evolution that he conceived independently. It had actually come to him in this extraordinary visionary experience, which so often happens in the history of scientific breakthroughs, that the insight doesn't come from, simply proceeding from kind of one theoretical step to the next or evidence-based, but it's actually a vision. It's a moment of revelation or awakening. So Wallace conceived of evolution independently, shared his theory with Darwin, and then they were persuaded to work together to present a joint paper in London on the theory. And then during that same conjunction, Jupiter-Uranus in 1858, Darwin begins writing his Origin of Species. Now, each of these discoveries, and we've just been focusing on science at this point, each of these discoveries contributes to a scientific paradigm shift. And so the Copernican revolution, the theory of biological evolution, relativity theory, and the quantum revolution, both of which, relativity theory and the quantum revolution, they both overturn the Newtonian classical physics. And so these are each examples of what is called a paradigm shift. You've probably heard that phrase, paradigm shift. It gets used quite frequently. But if we want to give credit to the person who first used and really popularized that term, we can turn to a scholar of the history of science, Thomas Kuhn, who published an extraordinary book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, where he points out that scientific revolutions, scientific progress doesn't just progress in a kind of a linear manner where we make discoveries that kind of affirm one after the next and we gain more and more knowledge. Rather, they happen in these kind of leaps, let's say quantum leaps of discovery that lead to a radical paradigm shift. And there's many things that contribute to the shift. But I'll just kind of give a simple breakdown of Kuhn's theory of the scientific paradigm shift, that it begins with normal science, where we're working within a particular paradigm or a particular worldview, and then conducting studies, gathering evidence. And what starts to happen is scientists recognize a number of anomalies, things that don't fit with the current theory. So with the Copernican revolution, it's that the calculations are not aligning with the data when you have the Earth at the center and you're using circular orbits of the planets around the Earth. And so in the Ptolemaic model, they kept having to make adjustments, more equants and epicycles to account for the anomalies. But at a certain point, the anomalies are so abundant, that Jupiterian word, that a crisis unfolds in the scientific community. And so then we enter into what Kuhn calls a period of extraordinary science, where we are, now there are many different competing theories that can help explain the data, whether that is different propositions for the heliocentric theory, or that Copernicus brings forth, or there was an alternative one that Tycho Brahe brought forward, where he was kind of trying to hold both a geocentric and heliocentric theory overlapping. There's many competing theories until one of those theories takes precedence. And what Kuhn describes is that theory doesn't take precedence because it's necessarily the most, it has the most data behind it. Rather, there's something that aligns with the cultural zeitgeist of that moment, and that it fits you could almost say like the mood of the culture, and that the paradigm shifts occur because there's a sense of liberation by entering into that new model, that new theory, and that the new model is incommensurate with the old. You cannot live in a geocentric and a heliocentric universe at the same time. You have to kind of flip between one and the other. So those are the 4 stages of a scientific paradigm shift that Thomas Kuhn laid out. And what's fascinating is he published his book, Structure of Scientific Revolutions, in 1962 under the Jupiter-Uranus opposition. Interestingly, opposite Uranus-Pluto, which has a deeper connection to scientific revolutions in general. Now, multiple inventions and technological breakthroughs have correlated with Jupiter-Uranus alignments. And I'm just going to throw out a few of the names of them, whether that's the discovery of electromagnetic induction, the invention of the telegraph, the invention of the electric light bulb, the first radio broadcast, the first motion picture, the first television transmission, the first internet transmission, the building of the first personal computer by Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs. Every single one of those aligns with a Jupiter-Uranus axial alignment, which is extraordinary to think about. The history of flight correlates with Jupiter-Uranus alignments, whether that's the first balloon flights in the late 18th century, the Wright brothers glider flight in 1900, interestingly, the same Jupiter-Uranus conjunction that correlates with the birth of psychoanalysis and the birth of quantum physics. The Charles Lindbergh's first solo airplane flight across the Atlantic in 1927, the same year as the Solvay Congress, where with the culmination of the quantum physics revolution. And then we can see it as well correlating with the history of space flight. So Alan Shepard and Yuri Gagarin's first space flights in 1961 and 62 under the Jupiter-Uranus opposition, and then the Apollo moon landing in 1969 under the Jupiter-Uranus-Pluto triple conjunction. So and that impulse to take flight, again, you can see it in that myth of Icarus. You can see it in the story of Peter Pan. You even can see it in the archetype of Uranus as connected to what it's actually named after, the sky god Uranus, as well as that Jupiterian quality of buoyancy, whether that's the buoyancy of a hot air balloon lifting off, the air uplifting, bringing up to the heights, the Jupiterian heights of airplanes or of rockets and so forth. Now, we can also see Jupiter-Uranus alignments in social and political rebellions and periods of emancipation. So significantly, the whole period of the American Revolution from 1775 to 76 took place under the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction of those years. The War of Independence began in July of 1775, so just 1 month after the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction entered 15-degree orb. And then, and I found that so interesting that the War of Independence, the American Revolution, took place under a Jupiter-Uranus alignment because the United States as a nation has that Jupiter-Uranus quality as part of its characteristic of this kind of youthful buoyancy and major orientation toward an identification with freedom. Now we see the signing of the Treaty of Paris, where the United States is actually signed by the United States and Great Britain. This is in 1783 under the following Jupiter-Uranus opposition. So right after the American Revolution, next Jupiter-Uranus axial alignment, the signing of the Treaty of Paris affirms the United States as an independent nation. So again, all of these words of independence, freedom, are Jupiter-Uranus qualities. And then the US Constitution goes into effect in 1789 under the following Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. And this is also when the first 12 amendments were written, 10 of which would be ratified a couple years later as the Bill of Rights. Now, under that same 1789 conjunction, this correlates with the storming of the Bastille in France, initiating the French Revolution. This is July 14th, 1789. So that 14-month Jupiter-Uranus conjunction correlates with all of the events, the significant events leading up to the French Revolution. And then, of course, the French Revolution took place over pretty much the whole course of the subsequent Uranus-Pluto opposition. But we see the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction initiated, start off that revolutionary period. Now, something kind of interesting and from very recent contemporary history that I noticed is the storming of the US Capitol on January 6th of 2021 actually took place under the most recent Jupiter-Uranus square. There were a lot of other alignments going on at that time that made it a little bit harder to notice that Jupiter-Uranus square. It was the end of the Uranus-Pluto square. It was the culmination of the Jupiter-Saturn-Pluto triple conjunction that correlated with COVID. It was near the beginning of the Saturn-Uranus square. I know I'm kind of throwing out a lot of different aspects here, but the Jupiter-Uranus square, which was, if we look at it in that 10-degree orb of influence, the only time that it was really within tight alignment was January of 2021. And I couldn't help but notice an interesting kind of parallel of that attitude of the storming of the US Capitol and the storming of the Bastille, and where there's that impulse for revolutionary overthrow. And I think this is something especially important for us to keep in mind as we go forward into this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, this history of the American Revolution, the signing of the Treaty of Paris, the US Constitution going into effect, all under Jupiter-Uranus alignments, where there is that very kind of buoyant, youthful, maybe potentially immature impulse to overthrow that can come in with Jupiter-Uranus. And we can see this as well, the Jupiter-Uranus opposition prior to that square. So this was in 2016, is when Trump was elected. And interestingly, Trump was born with a Sun-Uranus conjunction trine Pluto, or excuse me, trine Jupiter, Sun-Uranus trine Jupiter. And so he's actually a figure who carries some of the qualities of Jupiter-Uranus as well, in terms of that impulse to kind of bring radical change. However, you may agree or disagree with that, kind of presenting in a more neutral way the archetypal correlation to these political developments. And not to get too involved in expressing opinions at this point. But I think that's a really important thing to note as we go into this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction of the next 14 months. Now, I also want to speak to the way that Jupiter, when it comes into these larger outer planetary alignments, amplifies them. So for example, the storming of the Bastille with the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction kicks off the French Revolution, which then unfolds under the Uranus-Pluto opposition. And so just to give an example from recent history, the only triple conjunction of Jupiter, Uranus, and Pluto took place in 1968 and 1969. And Jupiter essentially took the larger cultural, revolutionary, social movement qualities of the 1960s and brought it to this extraordinary height in all areas. So whether that's the moon landing on July 20th, 1969, or we can see it in Woodstock, 1969, this kind of efflorescence of the countercultural movement coming through in music, or the Harlem Cultural Festival that took place over the summer of 1969, which is beautifully documented in the film Summer of Soul, if you haven't seen that. Just an amazing example of the Jupiter-Uranus-Pluto triple conjunction coming through in that series of music performances. I think there were 6 different events that constituted the Harlem Cultural Festival. I think there were about 16 major music festivals that took place across the United States in 1969. As I mentioned, the first transmission of the prototype of the internet took place under that Jupiter-Uranus-Pluto triple conjunction. The Gaia hypothesis that recognizes the Earth as a single self-regulating organism was formulated during that Jupiter-Uranus-Pluto triple conjunction by James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis as a kind of contributing scientist. And this is directly connected to the Earthrise photo, this famous photo taken in 1968 under that same triple conjunction. It was the first time humanity saw the Earth from the outside as a whole. That beautiful kind of blue-green jewel hanging in space, and what a radical transformation of consciousness that brings forth. Now, that same Jupiter-Uranus-Pluto triple conjunction correlates with a key turning point in the gay rights movement with the Stonewall riots. It's also the beginning of radical feminism. So this shift in the feminist and women's movement from just focusing on discrimination against women to recognizing a larger culture of oppression of women. Also, and this is something that particularly interests me in my own field of archetypal cosmology, it's the founding of transpersonal psychology under that triple conjunction by Stan Grof and others, and then the founding of archetypal psychology by James Hillman and others under the same alignment. And so that's just a few examples where you can see the Jupiter, Uranus, Pluto kind of bursting forth at the culmination of the Uranus Pluto conjunction of the 1960s. Now, to give a different example, when we see Jupiter in alignment with Uranus Neptune. Now, the most recent Uranus Neptune conjunction was from 1985 to 2001. And Jupiter opposed that near the beginning of the conjunction. It was actually even more kind of beautifully complex because Jupiter was opposite Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, 1989 to 1990. And just a few examples of what unfolded then that carry more of the ideological quality of an idealism and unification of Neptune, as opposed to the more Dionysian drive, evolutionary drive of Pluto. We can see that with the collapse of the Soviet Union at that time, this kind of widespread awakening in a nonviolent revolution that brought the end of the Cold War, the Velvet Revolution in Prague, and probably most significantly in terms of kind of cultural impact and effect, the fall of the Berlin Wall. And at the same time, during this same Jupiter opposite Uranus with Neptune involved, we see the release of Nelson Mandela and the movement towards the end of apartheid in South Africa, where there's this quality of, again, a revolution, but on compassionate ideological grounds and a reunification, for example, as you can see with the fall of the Berlin Wall. Now, there are innumerable works of art that have their kind of efflorescence under Jupiter-Uranus alignments. Music, literature, film created under Jupiter-Uranus alignments. And for many authors and poets and artists, their first works were written or published under a Jupiter-Uranus alignment. And so we can see this, whether it's Beethoven's Eroica, which was completed under the conjunction of 1803, that's inspired by the ideals of the French Revolution, which of course started under the previous Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, or 14 years later, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony under the subsequent conjunction of 1817. These kind of peaks in individual composers' careers. Interestingly, one of the direct inspirations for Beethoven's Eroica, which really carries that Jupiter-Uranus kind of buoyancy to it and joyful quality if you listen to it, is directly inspired by Mozart's symphony, his Jupiter Symphony. I love that it's called the Jupiter Symphony, which was, of course, composed during the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction of 1788-89. During that same conjunction, Haydn's Oxford Symphony was composed. And this has actually been called Haydn's Eroica. And so you can see that kind of connection between these pivotal pieces in the history of classical music that all carry that Jupiter-Uranus impulse toward freedom and opening and breakthrough and awakening. Wagner composed or completed his Tristan und Isolde in 1853 under the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. That's the same conjunction that correlated with Darwin and Wallace reading their joint paper on evolution. And many scholars consider this to mark the beginning of modern music. And so it's an extraordinary synchronicity that the book that's considered to mark the beginning of modern literature, it's a work of poetry, Baudelaire's Les Fleurs de Mal, was published under the same Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. So the beginning of modern literature, the beginning of modern music, you're probably hearing themes here, beginnings, firsts, where it's that threshold moment of something creative, something new that is crossed at that time. There's this extraordinary period in terms of modern literature from December of 1913 to January of 1915, where major works are being published by Joyce and Proust and Kafka and Yeats and Pound and Eliot and Stein and Lawrence and Woolf. All of them were bringing forward major works at this time. And again, it's that creative wave of the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. For those of you who've heard me speak in the past on the correlations between Jung's Red Book and Tolkien's Red Book of Westmarch, this period, that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction of 1913, it's actually late 1913 through early 1915, it's the start of Jung's Red Book period. It's also the beginning of Tolkien's Middle-earth mythology with his poem, The Voyage of Eärendil, the Evening Star. It's the beginning of the entire Middle-earth mythology, which he then commences working on for the next more than 4 decades. And now what's interesting about that conjunction is it correlates with the start of World War I. And so World War I started under a Saturn-Pluto conjunction and a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. And we usually think of World War I more under the archetypal qualities of the Saturn-Pluto, the most devastating war historically up until that moment, until World War II, which is also a Saturn-Pluto phenomenon. But the interesting thing about World War I is it correlated with this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. And if we look at records from that time, there was this tremendous excitement, like this youthful buoyancy among the young men who were signing up to go to war. And there were even young Germans and young Englishmen who, it's kind of heartbreaking in retrospect to think of, they'd be shaking hands at university and say, see you on the battlefield. It had been just long enough that Europe had had a major war that the younger generation had forgotten how horrific war could be. And this was also the first, called the First War of the Machines. It's actually J.R.R. Tolkien who fought in that war, who called it that. So again, that kind of technological element where tanks and machine guns are a part of the war, and yet they're using old battle tactics of charging across a field and trench warfare that is completely outdated for the technology. But that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction actually contributes to the excitement of these young men who, there was an entire generation lost across Europe in that war. But that excitement and patriotism of signing up, of fighting for one's country, that you can see the shadow side of Jupiter-Uranus with that naivete, that impulse toward heroism, and yet, alas, the tragedy that comes forward following that, kind of the loss of innocence that war brought forth. Now, the Jupiter-Uranus, we also can see it where different authors, they'll bring forward a series of works, and the first book in that series correlates with a Jupiter-Uranus alignment. And so just bringing forward a few examples, Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes series, the very first book, the very first story came out under the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction of 1886. Or Lewis Carroll, his Alice in Wonderland comes out under the 1865 opposition, and then his Through the Looking Glass comes out under the 1872 opposition, so just half a cycle later. Coming back to my beloved Tolkien again, he wrote The Lord of the Rings for 12 years, and then it took a number of years to bring it to publication. When did it finally come out? 1954 and 1955, under the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. So Middle-earth is born in some ways under a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. The Lord of the Rings is published under a subsequent Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. That same conjunction correlated with the first of J.D. Salinger's extraordinary Glass Family series, if you've ever read any of those, beginning with Franny, which becomes part of the pair of stories, Franny and Zooey, which is a great example not only of Jupiter-Uranus, but Uranus-Neptune. Or we can see the first in another very well-known series, J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, comes out in 1997 under the Jupiter-Uranus-Neptune triple conjunction. That same triple conjunction, Jupiter-Uranus-Neptune, which is a very rare triple conjunction, extraordinary wave, of films that came out in 1997. Just to name a couple: Contact, Princess Mononoke, Titanic. Think of Titanic, this kind of grand, grand technological feat depicting a story at sea, the Neptunian element. The history of film, it follows the same Jupiter-Uranus patterning. And we can see this in terms of music: the birth of jazz, the birth of rock and roll, the birth of rhythm and blues. All of the significant songs or pieces that contributed to the birth of each of those musical movements correlates with the Jupiter-Uranus axial alignment. So this presentation thus far has been very Jupiter-Uranus in that I'm speaking faster and faster. I'm giving probably far more examples and far more dates, that Jupiterian abundance, than you can keep track of. Or if you have a very Uranian mind, maybe it's going very quickly right now. So that's why we record these things. Thank you to the technology. So you can go back and review that. But that kind of gives you a sense of just, I mean, that's just a fraction of the examples we can bring forward in so many different fields regarding Jupiter-Uranus alignments. So now I want to give you a few examples, and also let you go into more of the sensory experience of the Jupiter-Uranus archetypal complex. And so the first example that I want to give is, if we look to, again, I mentioned the history of film and breakthroughs there. The history of comedy too has a special connection to Jupiter-Uranus. Charlie Chaplin's early films under the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction of 1914, Monty Python in 1969. But when we really think of that kind of comedic genius, someone who might come to mind is Robin Williams. And now Robin Williams happened to be born with a Jupiter-Uranus square. And the film example that I want to bring forward, that, I mean, we could choose so many of Robin Williams films that could illustrate this, but the example I want to give is of Aladdin. So let's first just look at Robin Williams' chart. So here we are. This is Robin Williams' chart, born July 21st, 1951. And so there you can see the Jupiter-Uranus square in his chart. It's actually part of a T-square involving Neptune and Mars. And with Robin Williams, you can really see that Mars Jupiter-Uranus kind of prankster quality. He's an absolute genius when it comes to improvisation and doing things off the cuff very quickly, to the point where, with Mars kind of driving it and giving it fire and energy, it's almost impossible to keep up with him. And what's great about the example of Aladdin, of Robin Williams playing the genie in Aladdin, is a lot of his performance was improvised. And then the animators were able to bring that to life in a way that takes it kind of even beyond what he can do just as an individual performing. And that's beautifully fitting, not only to bring forward the kind of imagistic base of animation, which Robin Williams is born with his Uranus square Neptune. We can look at the whole kind of history of animation, Walt Disney, also Hayao Miyazaki, great Uranus-Neptune figures, where major works of animation came out under, whether it's the Uranus-Neptune trine of the late 30s, early 40s, or the conjunction of the late 80s through the 90s. We just see this efflorescence of extraordinary animation. So Aladdin, let me just bring this in as a biwheel. Well, actually, let's first look at Aladdin on its own. Aladdin comes out November 25th, 1992. This is a film I grew up with. And you can see here, there's the Uranus-Neptune conjunction of the late 80s and 90s. Again, it's just kind of a peak of Walt Disney's animation. And then it's forming that square to Jupiter. And so the Jupiter-Uranus square, just like in Robin Williams' chart, is present there. And then what's amazing, now let's look at it as the biwheel. Robin Williams was in his Uranus opposition at that time. Again, just a major kind of midlife transit that leads to breakthroughs and awakenings and, kind of the height of one's career often. And then you can see here's Jupiter in the sky forming a grand cross with his Jupiter and his Uranus, his Mars-Uranus conjunction. Neptune's all involved. So it's this extraordinary kind of grand cross that's bringing in these multiple themes of Jupiter, Uranus in particular, but Neptune is definitely present. Okay, so I'm going to show you two clips from, it's actually kind of one clip out of Aladdin, but it's in two different videos because I have taken the song out. You can go back and watch all of Aladdin to really enjoy this, but this is a good way to get a taste. So I'll play the first clip, stop the share, bring up the second clip. So here we go.
My head. We're trapped. That two-faced son of a jackal. Oh, whoever he was, he's long gone with that lamp. Why, you hairy little thief. Looks like such a beat-up, worthless piece of junk. Hey, I think there's something written here, but it's hard to make out.
Why? 10,000 years will give you such a crick in the neck. Hang on a second. Wow! Wow! Does it feel good to be out of there? I'm telling you, nice to be back, ladies and gentlemen. Hi, where are you from? What's your name?
Aladdin.
Aladdin. Hello, Aladdin. Nice to have you on the show. Can we call you Al, or maybe just Din? Or how about Laddie? Sounds like, here, boy. Come on, Laddie.
I must have hit my head harder than I thought.
Do you smoke? Mind if I do? Oh, sorry, Cheetah. Hope I didn't singe the fur. Yo, Rockman. Haven't seen you in a few millennia. Give me some tassel. Yo, yo. Say, you're a lot smaller than my last master. Either that or I'm getting bigger. Look at me from the side. Do I look different to you?
Wait a minute. I'm your master?
That's right. He can be taught. What would you wish of me?
The ever impressive.
The one contains, but never duplicated. Duplicated. Genie of the lamp. Right here, direct from the lamp. Right here for your very much wish fulfillment. Thank you.
Whoa. Wish fulfillment?
3 wishes to be exact. An ixnay on the wishing for more wishes. That's it. 3. 1, 2, 3. No substitutions, exchanges, or refund.
Now I know I'm...
All right, let me pull up the other half of that. I have the impulse, you want to hear it go right into the song for those of you who know the film. All right. Oh, hang on. It had me pull up the wrong one. It's a fun thing when you're honoring Jupiter, Uranus, and you're also working with technology. I want to make sure it all lines up well.
So what'll it be, Master?
You're gonna grant me any 3 wishes I want, right?
Almost. There are a few provisos, a couple of quid pro quos.
Like...
Rule number 1, I can't kill anybody.
Yeah, so don't ask.
Rule number 2, I can't make anybody fall in love with anybody else. Mwah, you little punum there. Rule number 3,
I can't bring people back from the dead. It's not a pretty picture. I don't like doing it.
other than that, you got it.
Provisos? You mean limitations? On wishes? Some all-powerful genie can't even bring people back from the dead. I don't know, Abu. You probably can't even get us out of this cave. Looks like we're gonna have to find a way out of here.
Excuse me? Are you looking at me? Did you rub my lamp? Did you wake me up? Did you bring me here? And all of a sudden you're walking out on me? I don't think so. Not right now. You're getting your wishes, so sit down! In case of emergency, the exits are here, here. Anywhere. Keep your hands and arms inside the carpet. Here.
All right. So that's the great Robin Williams, who is playing the part of the genie. And I just want to bring forward a few of the just the Jupiter-Uranus qualities you see there. So at this point, Aladdin is trapped in the Cave of Wonders that has collapsed. And but Abu, his monkey, has managed to hang on to the lamp, which has the genie in it. When he rubs the lamp, what's the first thing you see? You see fireworks, which are such a Jupiter-Uranus kind of archetypal expression. Think of Katy Perry's Firework that came out under the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, the last Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. I think it was 2011 that it came out. And so you see fireworks. It's just this explosion of creative energy. It's hilarious, that Jupiterian impulse toward laughter, the unexpected kind of comedic genius. And then what's extraordinary is in that latter part, when Aladdin is taken in, that he gets these 3 wishes, what does he do? He tricks the genie. So there's the trickster element again. He tricks the genie into getting them out of the cave without using one of his 3 wishes. And then how do they get out? The genie becomes a flight attendant. Exits are here. Again, that history of flight. This time it's a flying magic carpet. And then they break out of the Cave of Wonders. And something archetypally we see with Jupiter-Uranus, it's that moment of birth. So when we're being born, when we're struggling through the birth canal, which is very much a kind of death rebirth experience, whether you're going through that as an infant or you're reliving it in an expanded state of consciousness, that moment of birth, when we actually come through the birth canal, it's that Jupiter-Uranus breakthrough into a whole new world. And that's what we see here as the genie breaks him out of the Cave of Wonders. In some ways, it is like a womb that is then broken out of that sense of freedom and openness, breathing the free air again. So I love that example because it carries so many of the Jupiter-Uranus qualities that Robin Williams was born with, and then he expresses so beautifully in his performance in Aladdin, and that it was at such a significant moment in his own life when it's not only his Uranus opposition, but Jupiter is in there as well, just forming this kind of double Jupiter-Uranus grand cross. Okay, so the next example that I want to bring forward, this is a very brief clip, and this is looking at an individual who was born when I'm just getting my videos queued up here as I'm saying this. So this is an individual who was born at this virtually the same moment as the fall of the Berlin Wall. And so late 1989. And this is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC. She was born in October of 1989. And let's just pull up her chart for a moment, because this is less than a month before the Berlin Wall falls. And so it's as the Cold War is ending, it's that really kind of exciting period where the Soviet Union is dissolving. There's a kind of reunification. There's a sense of hope, and again, of a political breakthrough in this case. And so you can see there, she's born with Jupiter opposite Uranus, Saturn, and Neptune. The Jupiter-Uranus at that point is 9 degrees apart. It continues to tighten in through the whole next year, 1990. And I came across this wonderful video of her. It's when she was, when she won the Democratic primary in New York in 2018. And the clip I'm going to show gives you a kind of feeling for the Jupiter-Uranus wow moment. But she's also very much a Jupiter-Uranus figure. She's revolutionary. She was the youngest person at that point, not anymore, to be elected to Congress. And it was a kind of huge breakthrough moment for her, and also kind of at a political level as well, 2018 being an interesting turning point in the midterms. And I just want to show you the transit chart here. Her Saturn return was well into effect at this point. It's just within 3 degrees. And so this is actually a great example of the Saturn return too, someone kind of coming into this culminating moment in their lives. But interestingly, while there wasn't a hard aspect of Jupiter-Uranus, there was an exact quincunx of Jupiter-Uranus in the sky at the time of the New York Democratic primary. So that Jupiter-Uranus archetypal energies in the sky at this time, but it's really embodied by AOC, as you can see, when she realizes that she's won the primary. And something with Jupiter-Uranus, there's a wow factor to it. People who are born with Jupiter-Uranus tend to say things like, wow. Think of Steve Jobs, who on his deathbed, his final words were, wow. And you notice in the next 14 months, if you say things like, wow, or amazing, or how exciting, or thank God, or thank the Lord, these are all kind of Jupiter-Uranus qualities. So let me pull up this clip for you so you can see this expressed. And again, this is when she's coming into a bar where the results are being announced on the television. This is in 2018. Here we go.
Here's the candidate. I think she's walking in right now. Well, I'm gonna grab her. She's right here. I can't let you know. She's looking at herself on television right now. How are you feeling? Can you put it into words?
Nope. I cannot put this into words.
All right, your supporters here are very excited for you. This was a grassroots campaign. Can you believe the numbers that you're seeing right now?
I cannot believe these numbers right now, but I do know that every single person here has worked their butt off to change the future of the Bronx and Queens. That's what I know. That's what I know. And that this victory belongs to every single grassroots organizer, every working parent, every mom, every member of the LGBTQ community. Every single person is responsible for this. Well, I think what we've seen is that working class Americans want a clear champion, and there is nothing radical about moral clarity in 2018.
All right, so you can see in that one, she gets it together, but in that first moment where she just completely is overtaken by that sense of wow and oh my God, it's just such a great expression of the Jupiter-Uranus in an individual who was born with that, and kind of that natural response and amazement. Okay, so my next example, and let me just pause and acknowledge Saturn, our timekeeper. I'm going to go a little bit beyond the 90 minutes that I said I was going to speak. There's still going to be plenty of time for discussion, but I want to just give you a couple more examples before we turn to that discussion. And then I think we'll have the Q&A, and I'm going to save one final example as kind of our closing, just to really round things out. Okay. So the next example that I want to give, let me just pull these examples up in preparation. So again, the relationship of Jupiter-Uranus to technology, and the example I want to give here is of the invention, the creation of a technology, a platform that has changed or affected all our lives, many of our lives in significant ways, whether or not we use it, and that is Facebook. So Facebook was actually created under the Jupiter-Uranus opposition that lasted from 2002 until 2004. And let me just show you, it was actually started off as a company called Face Mash. And now at this point, here's a good example of why I use the orbs that I do, because the Jupiter-Uranus opposition appears pretty wide at this point in 2003. They're 14 degrees apart here, but they entered within that 15-degree orb back in 2002 already. And so even though they're wider apart at this moment when Face Mash is created by Mark Zuckerberg and the team that he was working with, this is actually part of the full Jupiter-Uranus opposition of that time period. And so when we look forward, let me just stop the share for a second to pull up that other chart. When we look forward to the creation of Facebook in early 2004, we're still within that window of the Jupiter-Uranus opposition. And so let me just show that where we have the chart for Facebook. Again, they're even wider apart at this point. And this is why it's really important when you're doing research into particular events to look at, well, what are the larger outer planetary cycles that are taking place at that time? Because you might miss something. I certainly would have missed that if I was looking just at the birth chart of Facebook or the birth chart of Face Mash several months earlier. But it's, again, part of this larger Jupiter-Uranus opposition that lasted 2002 through 2004. And to illustrate this, I want to show a clip from the film The Social Network. And interestingly, this film came out, surprise, surprise, in 2010 under the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, which is very tight at this point. And The Social Network documents isn't quite the right word because it's not a documentary, it's a feature film, but it's an illustration of Jupiter-Uranus as it's expressed in the creation of Facebook and the culture, the very youthful, very male culture, puer eternus, the eternal child kind of culture that birthed this social media platform. And so I'm going to show you a short clip from that film. Again, this is a film that's absolutely worth watching in whole if you want to really get a sense for how Jupiter-Uranus comes through in the film, but also in the historical events that it is depicting. And again, just in this clip, make note of it's oriented around technology. There's a lot of excitement. Notice both of the two clips that I showed you before, AOC and also Aladdin, they're loud, like it's explosive, there's firework qualities, there's people screaming. It's going to be the same thing here. And just notice that kind of a youth culture, Jupiter-Uranus adolescent element that is being, in a Jupiterian way, celebrated. So let me just get my clip together for this so we can see on the social network.
They have 10 minutes to get root access to a Python web server, expose its SSL encryption, and then intercept all traffic over its secure ports.
They're hacking.
Yes, all behind a fixed firewall emulator, but here's the beauty.
You know I didn't understand anything you just said, right?
I do know that.
So what's the beauty?
Every 10th line of code written, they have to drink a shot. And hacking's supposed to be stealth, so every time the server detects an intrusion, the candidate responsible has to drink a shot. I also have a program running that has a pop-up window appear simultaneously on all 5 computers. The last candidate to hit the window has to drink a shot. Plus, every 3 minutes, they all have to drink a shot.
Hey, can I ask, what part of the intern's job will they need to be able to do drunk?
You're right. A more relevant test might be seeing if they can keep a chicken alive for a week. That was me.
Here.
What is this?
I opened a new account and put $18,000 in it. Did I get you through the summer?
Welcome to Facebook.
All right. So again, you kind of get a feeling for that Jupiter-Uranus buoyancy that's present there. And interestingly, in that scene too, there's an exchange of money, of abundance, of finances, which also relates to Jupiter, to wealth, and how abundance, Jupiter, makes possible the Uranian technological endeavor that they're taking on here. So the last example that I want to give before we move into our dialogue is around something that I've already been discussing, and this is the history of flight and the history of the space program. And so I told you already that, and I'm pulling up charts as I'm speaking about this. So if I pause along the way, just because I'm queuing up the rest of my charts here, that's what's going on. So I told you already about the Apollo moon landing, July 20th, 1969, that took place under the Jupiter-Uranus-Pluto triple conjunction. And but that culmination of the space program, of the space race, really starts much earlier. And there's important figures who are involved in that race. And this was really beautifully documented in the film that came out back in 2017, significantly under a Jupiter-Uranus-Pluto T-square, the film Hidden Figures. And Hidden Figures tells the story particularly of Katherine Johnson, who was an extraordinary genius mathematician. She is a Black woman who was brought on to work for NASA as one of their mathematical calculators. And she did the calculations by hand for all the earliest space flights. So Alan Shepard's first space flight, John Glenn's first orbit, and then she did the calculations for the Apollo moon landing as well. Just an extraordinary person. Her biography is called Reach for the Moon, and she is now kind of being recognized for the just pivotal role she played as this genius. There's that Uranian genius again, mathematician, in calculating the entry and exit points and a number of other things for these different space flights. And so I'm going to be showing you a clip from that film, but I want to also just let you see some of the significant charts at this point as well. So first, let's actually, let me just think about this for a second. Yeah. Okay. What we're going to be looking at, the clip from the film actually looks at John Glenn's first orbit. So that's the first chart that I want us to look at. This is at the beginning of the 1960s Uranus-Pluto conjunction. And that's really significant because Uranus-Pluto correlates with major developments in terms of the history of science and technology. The Jupiter-Uranus that we looked at today is kind of peak moments in that, but the longer trajectory is related to these Uranus-Pluto alignments, where Pluto's really driving the technology or the scientific breakthrough. But it's when all three are involved that we have these major moments. And so John Glenn's first orbit took place February 20th, 1962. And you can see here, there's the Jupiter-Uranus opposition in full effect. The Uranus-Pluto's coming into alignment. It reached 15-degree orb back in 1960. But as you can see, Uranus is still approaching Pluto. But look how the sun is highlighting Jupiter. And so the sun tends to bring emphasis to what it touches. It literally shines a light on whatever aspect it's in relationship to, brings it to the fore. And of course, that was in the sky that day of John Glenn's first orbit. And so there's this sense of excitement, the sense of something new that's happening at this time. Now, I also want to show you Katherine Johnson's chart. And so let's look at it on its own. Now, she isn't born with Jupiter-Uranus, but she is born with a Sun-Uranus opposition. And so that's just a classic example of an individual who has that genius quality. And she truly was a mathematical genius, who, thanks to this beautiful film, Hidden Figures, which I will often assign for my classes as an example of Uranus-Pluto, because of how it looks at, it's set in the 1960s. So Uranus-Pluto, the Uranus-Pluto conjunction, it came out in 2017 under the Jupiter-Uranus-Pluto T-square. And let me just show you that really quickly. This is when Hidden Figures came out in 2017. There you can see Jupiter, Uranus, and Pluto in that T-square when it premiered. And but also another reason that I like this film to illustrate Uranus-Pluto in the 1960s is the focus on the space race, the focus on women's rights, and the focus on African Americans and civil rights. And it focuses on 3 Black women who worked for NASA at that time. So it's a wonderful film for illustrating these different facets of the Uranus-Pluto alignment, particularly the 1960s, where you can really experience it fully. So again, another recommendation, if you haven't seen this film, definitely something to enjoy. So coming back now to Katherine Johnson and John Glenn's first orbit, we have yet again a great example. She was in her Uranus opposition when she calculated the entry location for John Glenn coming back in. And he specifically requested her to do it because he knew she was the best mathematician at NASA. And so at that point, they were starting to work with a new computer, which took up an entire room to do its calculations. But Katherine Johnson, the mathematical genius, was able to do these calculations. And so this was a huge moment for her in terms of her career, that this happens at her Uranus opposition. And not only that, but Uranus is transiting her Jupiter. It's soon to be approaching her sun. Excuse me, I have these flipped. There we go. I want her on the inside just because it's a little easier to see. Jupiter, excuse me, is conjunct her Uranus. It's her Uranus opposition. I knew that wasn't sounding right as I was saying that. So the sun, Jupiter, is crossing her Uranus. It's her Uranus opposition. And then Uranus was approaching her natal sun. Sorry, I had that reversed before. So let me just reiterate that. And Uranus conjoining her sun was a major transit that she had through the 1960s, which of course culminates in the Apollo moon landing, where she also does the calculations for that. And so I just want to show you that chart as well for the Apollo moon landing, because there's that Jupiter-Uranus-Pluto triple conjunction. We were talking about all the extraordinary things that happened under that triple conjunction in 1968, 1969. But look at this, July 20th. So it takes the astronauts 3 days to get from Earth to the moon. And when Armstrong sets foot on the moon, it's July 20th. And look what is in that conjunction, but the moon itself. I mean, you cannot make these things up. It is absolutely extraordinary that on the day of the moon landing, as a human being makes contact with the moon for the first time, which is all expressed in that Jupiter-Uranus-Pluto, the Uranus-Pluto scientific and technological drive, the Jupiter-Uranus history of flight. It all comes together. The moon itself is involved symbolically, and in this case, physically, in that quadruple conjunction. It's just amazing to think about. And again, Katherine Johnson's calculations were used for that voyage as well. Okay, so I'm now going to pull up that clip so you can watch it, and then we'll just discuss briefly some of the themes that are present there as well that reflect particularly the Jupiter-Uranus quality. And I think you'll probably start to notice common themes in all of the clips that I've shared in terms of the emotional quality, but also symbolic images. Keep your eye open, your archetypal eye open for different symbolic images. So this is the clip near the end of Hidden Figures. This is after Katherine Johnson has done her calculations by hand, where John Glenn wasn't going to go up until she had done the calculations to confirm that the computer was right. And so this is from the room where all of the scientists at NASA are tracking John Glenn's orbit, his space flight. And Katherine Johnson's in the room there. She's played beautifully by Taraji P. Henson, who was born right at the end of the Uranus-Pluto conjunction in the early 70s. So such a fitting person to play that role. So here we are with our next clip.
We have a warning light.
Capcom 7, I have a warning light.
Stand by, 7.
Sir, you have a warning light.
What are we looking at, Paul?
The heat shield may have come loose.
7, will you confirm the landing bag is in the off position?
Affirmative, Capcom. We need to get him down now. He could burn up on re-entry.
The heat shield's loose. The retro package straps might hold it in place.
Will that work?
It will work. It will hold it until he reaches the go, no-go point. It will work.
Capcom, you're going out. He's crossing the communication blackout zone.
There's a real fireball outside. It's getting a little hot in here.
Fireball outside.
Just like that.
Friendship 7, do you copy? Over. Again. Friendship 7, do you copy? Over.
Loud and clear, Capcom.
Roger that. How are you doing?
My condition's good. That was a real fireball, boy.
Roger that. Let's get you all the way home.
Roger that. Here's hoping these landing coordinates still hold.
Approaching 16.11984.
Roger.
Approaching minus 165.2356 in 3, 2, 1.
Engaging shoots. Beautiful shoot. How are we looking, Capcom?
Your go, no go is good. Landing coordinates are spot on, 7.
Roger that, Capcom. I have always wanted to swim in the Bahamas. Over.
Okay, so I always feel the tension of that clip. I've seen it so many times. And, you know, that had such a potential to be an Icarus moment, that striving for the heights, to break beyond the barriers of Earth's gravity, so easily he could have burned up on reentry. And yet there's that thank the Lord moment that, you know, you see them all praying, and then as they make contact again and you realize that he survived, that he's made it, there's that extraordinary flooding sense of relief. And that's a quality of Jupiter-Uranus, that feeling of relief, that feeling of everything's going to be okay, everything's going to be all right. That kind of breathing the free air. And as he's coming back in, even as the parachute inflate, another Jupiterian word, and the parachute kind of resembles the hot air balloon, yet another kind of flying device. As he's coming in, it's that safely successful moment of technological achievement, and again, of the word that I keep using, of breakthrough. So as you've seen and as you've heard, Jupiter-Uranus periods, they really awaken this creative potency, and they carry forward a wave of creative energy through the collective. And it's in such periods that new ideas are birthed, new projects take flight, new collaborations are formed. One may move or visit a new place that changes your perspective, or brings about new significant meetings that radically alter the course of your life. One can accidentally discover a new book, or a connection with a teacher or a mentor or a colleague or a collaborator that brings one's work or one's creative endeavors in a new direction. Jupiter-Uranus is not only known for significant meetings, but also the formation of new groups and new organizations and new institutions. That wave of excitement that the Jupiter-Uranus carries, many people tend to come together under those alignments, to whether it's carrying an endeavor forward or bringing something new forward. Just in these first weeks of this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, I got to experience that firsthand by participating in the Psychedelic Science Conference in Denver, where 12,000 people, talk about a Jupiterian mass, showed up with this kind of awakening around using psychedelics for healing. And as the founder of MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, said in his opening speech, they're aiming for a net zero trauma society by 2070. Extraordinarily ambitious goal, and yet one where all of this collaboration around these medicines, these sacred medicines, when used properly, really can bring about that healing of PTSD, that healing of trauma, that breakthrough of creativity and awakening to new possibilities for many different individuals. So it was really interesting to witness that as a correlation right at the beginning of this current Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. And I'm very curious to see how it unfolds in the next 14 months. And whether one is getting, now we're all entering into this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction now. And some of us will be getting it in really significant placements. Maybe it's your Uranus opposition. Maybe it's crossing your sun, or your moon, or your ascendant. For others, it might not be as personal, but you're still going to be participating in that larger collective wave. But even if you don't have that personal connection to this Jupiter-Uranus alignment, one of the most potent ways any of us can experience Jupiter-Uranus is by personal transit. So that can be when Jupiter transits your natal Uranus, which lasts anywhere from 3 weeks to 9 months, or when Uranus transits your natal Jupiter, which lasts 3 years and is a very significant transit. And so I want to encourage you to calculate when you had your last Jupiter-Uranus transit, or when the next one might be coming up. And this Jupiter, whether it's a personal Jupiter-Uranus transit or again this collective one, it might be the perfect time to take on that project that you've always wanted to complete, but you've never had the time or maybe the courage to do it. Jupiter-Uranus as this profound archetypal complex, it may be the blessed wind that allows your wings to soar to new and unimagined heights. Okay, my contact details. My website is just my name, beccatarnas.com. That's the easiest way to find what I do. I'm now a full-time assistant professor at the California Institute of Integral Studies, so I am no longer giving astrology readings. I'm happy to recommend other archetypal astrologers who work in a very similar vein as I do, but I have officially closed my practice at this time, which is of course a kind of bittersweet thing. But if you want to study in graduate school with me, I am now teaching in the Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness program at CIIS, and it's a master's program and a PhD program. So whether you want to come into this multidisciplinary program, I have amazing colleagues there, and earn your master's degree or maybe write a dissertation under my supervision. It's one of only a couple institutions where archetypal cosmology and astrology are being taught at the graduate level, where dissertations are being granted in that subject. So it's very exciting to be doing that. My website does have a contact page. I am not the fastest person at responding to correspondence just because of the volume that comes in. So if I can't respond to you or you hear from me in 2 years, please don't take it personally. I'm just doing my best and it's just me. I don't have an assistant or anything. So please be patient and know that I'll read it even if I don't have a chance to reply. Okay. So let's bring this home, bringing it all back home, as is kind of a fitting way to conclude this with Bob Dylan. And let me get my clip and chart available so that you can see that. Bob Dylan, as I mentioned, was born with that extraordinary Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus triple conjunction. He also has the moon involved in it. And that placement of the moon, we can see in so many extraordinary ways with his, no direction home, his sense of kind of being displaced, his, kind of moving on from the place where he grew up, being freewheeling. And his Jupiter-Uranus has come through in his seemingly just boundless creativity over the decades. He is, every time he performs even old songs, he changes them in various ways. There's always something new that's coming forward in Dylan's performances. During the mid-1960s, he was pretty much reinventing 1960s popular music, rock, folk, both lyrics and the music just powerfully wedded. And in 1963, his breakthrough album was called Freewheeling Bob Dylan. And that's coming on the heels of the Jupiter-Uranus opposition, and of course the Uranus-Pluto conjunction tightening in. And two of the songs from that album, Blowing in the Wind and The Times They Are Changing, they became revolutionary anthems for the social movements and anti-war protests of the 1960s. Dylan wrote so many protest songs. They were anti-war, they were anti-racism, they were anti-establishment. You could hear the Uranian rebel in him. Jupiter-Uranus with Saturn, he's pushing against the establishment, he's pushing against the structures, he's pushing against tradition. Dylan's probably his most revolutionary single song that really fully changed the playing field was Like a Rolling Stone of 1965. And Like a Rolling Stone, it expanded commercial and creative boundaries in popular music. It's also very much a Saturn moon song. You know, how does it feel to be on your own? That moon Saturn experience, no direction home, that sense of not having roots, not having a home, very much reflecting his moon Saturn in that stellium, as well as the Saturn Uranus Pluto of the time of the mid 1960s. So all his 1960s music has that Uranus Pluto world transit behind it, which his music, it's in turn not only reflecting, but it's propelling. And then of course his natal sun Uranus, also part of that stellium, is just central in understanding who he is as that brilliant, creative, individual genius. Again, someone like Katherine Johnson, we see that individual genius. And interestingly, when Dylan won the Nobel Prize for Literature, which, you know, kind of got some complaints among the establishment literati, Leonard Cohen, another extraordinary songwriter, said that giving Dylan the Nobel Prize was like pinning a medal on Mount Everest for being the highest mountain, which I think is just such a fantastic characterization. So let me just show you briefly the Dylan's chart. So you can see here that stellium I'm talking about. There, of course, is the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in his chart. And there's Saturn as part of the alignment a little bit further away, the tight moon-Saturn conjunction there, part of the stellium. And then, of course, his sun involved in the Jupiter-Uranus. Like Descartes, also Sun, Jupiter-Uranus, and Descartes, interestingly, also Saturn with the moon. So the song that I want to play for you that'll bring us to a conclusion today, and thank you all so much for your attention, for your presence, for listening. We're going to end with Dylan's song, "The Times They Are Changing," and you can just hear it in the lyrics of that. He's a herald, he's a prophet of the revolutionary change of the 1960s with that Sun, Jupiter, Uranus. But you hear the presence of Saturn in there too, in that stellium. The times, Saturn, they are changing. And this is probably the most mellow of all the examples that I've played for you today. So Dylan will carry us out in conclusion. So here.
Come gather round, people, wherever you roam, and admit that the waters around you have grown, and accepted that soon you'll be drenched to the bone. If your time to you is worth saving, then you better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone, for the times, they are a-changing. Writers and critics who prophesize with your pen, and keep your eyes wide, the chance won't come again, and don't speak too soon, for the wheel's still in spin. And there's no telling who that it's naming, for the loser now might be later to win, for the times they are a-changing. Senators, congressmen, please heed the call. Don't stand in the doorway, don't block up the hall, for he that gets hurt will be he who is stalled. The battle outside raging will soon shake your windows and rattle your walls, for the times they are a-changing. mothers and fathers throughout the land. And don't criticize what you can't understand. Your sons and your daughters are beyond your command. Your old road is rapidly aging. Please get out of the new one if you can't lend your hand, for the times they are a-changing. The line it is drawn and the curse it is cast. This slow one now will later be fast, as the present now will later be past. The order is rapidly fading, and the first one now will later be last, for the times they are a-changing.
So young, so brilliant, such a prophet of the new era, Bob Dylan. So thank you all so much for listening. Thank you, Saffron, for hosting. My thanks to Nightlight Astrology School and to Adam for inviting me. And may you all have a blessed, exciting breakthrough Jupiter-Uranus in these next 14 months.